everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name's Liz Weaver, and I'm the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute. Today's webinar is Investing in Leadership, CHSSN case study. So we're going to hear from our colleagues at CHSSN. Great. So we want to begin today by acknowledging that we're meeting on Indigenous land and that as settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet and that we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this land. And I personally am joining you from the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. And this land is now known as Hamilton, and it is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant of 1792. And so it's the land that is around the Great Lakes. And if you think about the dish, the Great Lakes are the dish, and the one spoon is signatory of the fact that we all eat from the Great Lakes, that we all grow our vegetables and everything from the Great Lakes, and we all benefit from the Great Lakes. And so it's a lovely way of kind of understanding the land that we're on. And I really welcome all of you to, think about the land that you're joining us from. And if you'd like, put your land into the chat box. So we have some technical considerations for this webinar. So you're going to receive a full recording of the webinar and the slides and other resources. We'll put a little bit of a resource page together for you and email that to you in the next week or so. We have to edit the webinar content and get that out to you. We, through the course of the session today, if you have any questions, please put your questions into the Q&A function on the Zoom client panel. And you can vote for other people's questions if you want that question to be brought forward. At the end of the conversation that I'm having with Jennifer and Russ, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So please put them in the Q&A panel and we'll bring them forward. And for technical support, my colleague Delbert is on the line. He's under the contact information of Tamarack Institute. So if you have any challenges with technology or you have to leave the room and then come back in, Delbert is here to help you navigate technology. And so feel free to reach out to him at any time during the course of the webinar as well. So it's really my pleasure as the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute to introduce my colleagues, Jennifer Johnson and Russ Keeber from CHSSN. Before I go into their biographies, I have to say that Tamarack has a long and very, I think, fruitful relationship with CHSSN as an organization. We're both celebrating our 20th anniversary. You started a little bit earlier. We just started our 20th anniversary in April of this year. So, but it's nice to know that our journeys have kind of paralleled each other and intersected in many ways at different points in time. So I'm going to start by introducing you to Jennifer. So Jennifer has been the executive director of the Community Health and Social Services Network, CHSSN, since 2005 and worked for the organization since its inception in 2000. Jennifer co-authored a book called The Holland Center Experience, a community development model for minorities, which underscores the unique challenges a linguistic minority community faces in ensuring its long-term vitality. Jennifer holds a master's degree in public health from Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts, a certificate in international development from, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, and I'm sure, Jennifer, you could pronounce it much better, from the Institut Universitaire des Études de Développement in Geneva, Switzerland, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in English Literature from the University of the South Sewanee, TN. I guess, is that Tennessee?
Tennessee.
Tennessee, okay, there you go. She immigrated to Canada from the United States in 1991 and has been living in Quebec City ever since. So now I'm going to introduce you to Russ. Russ is the program manager and leads the community development support team at CHSSN. His primary role is providing training and development support in the English language networks across the province of Quebec. He has also authored a variety of CHSSN publications, such as the Community Mobilization Model for improving the health and vitality of English-speaking communities in Quebec. We're going to learn more about that model today. Prior to CHSSN, Russ was a manager in public health with the Alberta government. He has a master's degree in adult education, specializing in leadership and organizational development with the University of Calgary in Calgary, Alberta. Hey, welcome to both of you.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I had the good fortune of interviewing you both a couple of months ago in preparation for writing a case study about your work. And so today's webinar is really the next step in that journey, the interview, then the case study, and now being able to interview you for all of our learners online. So I wanted to start off this conversation with a little bit of a personal question for both of you. So my question is, first you, Jennifer, and then maybe you, Russ. Can you share something about yourselves which links together your personal passions with your work-related passions? So Jennifer, how might you answer that?
Yeah, it's actually a harder question to answer than one would think. But I did reflect a bit about that. And I think I can honestly say that the lessons I learned as a young person doing sports. So I was a horseback rider, and so I had amazing trainers, and listening to the masters and taking what they tell you and translating it into your own experience was something that I think I've applied in everything in my life ever since then. And I think that even in our CHSSN experience, and Russ, I'm sure will agree. I mean, we have always relied on, we go out and we find out what the experts are saying, and then we translate what those experts are saying into a framework that our community can understand. And that's been, I think, a really helpful way that my youth and my own experiences in a very different field have actually translated into my professional life.
Really interesting. Yeah, it is a combination of learning from experts, but then translating. What about you, Russ?
I'd say, well, maybe for those that are on the workshop today that, are not part of a minority themselves, or they're just working with the minority community. I guess one of the things, maybe Jennifer and I, like, we're both part of the minority community in Quebec. So it's, when I was in Calgary working in public health, you're working from majority mindset and you're trying to involve minority community. So I think one of the things is, I've had some lived experiences of what it means to be, a minority. It's kind of an ironic thing when you're moving in Canada and you instantly become a minority when you move into Quebec if you're an English speaker. And just some of those experiences, being a father and having, kids, and just going through all the different stages and phases of life. And just working my way to becoming more integrated at times, and being able to speak the French language, but also really trying to maintain my own English speaking culture and heritage and language. So I think there's a lot of passion that comes into our work, because we've also experienced some of the challenges, and it's truly about trying to make it a better place for the future generation. So we're highly motivated people, I think, also because of our experiences of being also part of this minority community that we're working on behalf of.
Really interesting answers. Thanks so much for sharing. I think it is a harder question than we imagine, right? This linking between our passions and the work that we do. So we're going to move on to another question, and this is one for you, Jennifer. So really I wanted to have you tell us a little bit about, since you've been with CHSSN from the very beginning, tell us a little bit about the origin of the organization and some of the thinking that went into that kind of early formation and the development of the network.
Yeah, and it has been my amazing privilege to be on this journey, because it was sort of like I was the right person, the right place, with the right education, And I just slipped into this amazing experience because it all generates from a success story, one single success story in a community, in the English speaking community in Quebec City. And that, and a desire to share that success story with others and to see if we can help others build on what they learned in one community. So in Quebec City, they had a, you know, it's really a real traditional community development uh, experience, in the sense that, you know, it's not rocket science. You know, John McKnight and, you know, a lot of community development people out there have been, you know, describing what the community development experience is, and the Quebec City really experienced it first, and exactly as they describe. You know, there's like a catalyst, and then there's a champion. You know, the catalyst is there was English speaking seniors that were falling through the cracks and not getting the services they needed in the community because they got left behind when the health system did a complete, you know, renewal. So that was the catalyst. And then there was the champion, where we had a couple of community partners that said, oh my gosh, these seniors, they're falling through the cracks, they're not getting the services, what can we do? So they sat down and they talked and they made a vision, and they built a vision about what they could do, and then they built a plan on how to do it. And then and you know, it really does fit a lot of the classical community development approach that you read, you know, with from the World Health Organization and, you know, many other places. And they started getting asked, you know, like, come help us do what you did in Quebec City. And they were like, oh my gosh, how do we do that? We don't have resources. So they actually reached out to a foundation, and that's where the J.W. McConnell Foundation came in with this project called So What You Know. And it was literally a program designed to disseminate successful stories. And so we, like I said, right place, right time, you know, we fell into this amazing program that Tamarack actually participated in as well. I was there with Paul Bourne in the beginning days of So What You Know. And so the McConnell Foundation gave us the capacity to reflect on what made it successful and what could be disseminated to others. And so we developed this theory about, you know, what made us successful and what could be given or as tools to others. And outside of that classical community development principles, we identified two things that really made it stand out because of the minority community setting. You know, building culturally appropriate services. You know, you have to take into consideration the client's backgrounds, the client's beliefs, the client's needs. And, you know, you have to make sure the two things that's made this Quebec City experience stand out was that the community was in a leadership position. The community decided what they were doing, and they invested, and they built the partnerships from the community outwards. And then the other thing that really made it stand out was that knowledge, the understanding of who the community was, and being able to have concrete evidence that this is the problem in our community and this is how we think we can help you fix it. So the community was in that leadership position again in its community development process. And I'd say those two elements are key to what we disseminated to communities across the province of Quebec. And, you know, it took a long time too. Oh, there it is. Yes, the map. So on this map, and I saw a lot of familiar names, and there's a lot of people that are on one of these dots. But there are a lot of people I have a feeling today that are not familiar with our community. So each one of these red dots represents a community organization serving the English-speaking community in Quebec. And we helped all of these organizations expand their capacity to improve access to English language health and social services in their communities over the past 20 years. And like I said, it took time. It was not something that happened overnight, but you know, it was a deliberate, methodical process of helping a community organization develop that knowledge base, develop the skills to become a partner, to become an actor in responding to the services, and not just not a complainant. It's not somebody, you're not saying this is the problem all the time. You're actually identifying a problem and a solution. And I think that that really has been the heart of CHSSN's success in the past 20 years.
Wow, such a really interesting story, and also the two foundations upon which you've built, the network, and how the network has been kind of co-created together with those of you at CHSSN. Hey, Russ, one of the things that drives your work forward is this community mobilization model, and I talked about it when I was introducing you. So can you maybe describe a little bit about this model and what it looks like for the network and how the network embraces it kind of going forward?
Sure, I'll get into it a little bit for everybody. Again, as Jennifer mentioned, I realize there's people that are unfamiliar with our networks on this, so I'll kind of be a bit more global and broad. But I think what Jennifer was mentioning, that the Holland Center experience and the book that was written that Jennifer co-authored, as we began to wanted to disseminate this to other regions and apply the model, we began to realize that we needed a way to engage communities and new communities in that dissemination model. And so it was really around working with those networks that were identified in the map to come up with a collective vision and approach to development that reflected, as Jennifer was mentioning, the traditional community development principles. So applying, the research and the leading experts in the field, but creating something that was very unique and special to the English-speaking community that reflected not only our needs and priorities, but our assets, the rich assets that we wanted to promote. So, and I'll just, prior to going on to the other slide, at the very top, I think the key thing was in 2012, we started this process of engaging people to help them feel and be part of the design of this model. So yes, we had a researcher. You'll see the institute, the Santé Public Health Institute in Quebec we had a researcher with us, working with us, but it was a really bottom-up approach, very similar to the Holland Center experience, where communities got to put their words into the model and define their vision for the future, what they felt were the key aspects for success leading us into the future. And at the very top, maybe go to the next slide if you like. Some of you on the call today, if you were with us at the time, you'll remember this, but it's still with us. A model that lasts 10 years, lasts a decade, it's pretty fun to see new people come in and get excited about it, that it's broad enough that they can see developing their own local strategies around this broader model. So it's kind of nice. But I think one of the lessons learned with this model is specifically around, we're asking communities to do two things. Well, a minority community in our mobilization efforts, we want to be part of the majority collective action plans and collective visions that governments and majority partners are putting forward. We want to be at the table. But in addition to that, we're saying we also need to have our own collective vision and development plan to see how we can integrate and fit into the majority, so that we have a good collective approach when we're meeting with the majority stakeholders and we're being asked to participate on tables and represent our needs, that we all have some kind of collective model that we can hold ourselves to. And the first and most important thing was, for those of you that have not worked with minorities or maybe felt what it's like to be in a minority, there are many no's that you get along the way. Maybe it's very simple or very subtle, sorry, but there are stereotypes that are associated to being in a minority. And so a minority community can develop a reflex of maybe not seeing that change is possible, or not seeing that their participation can make a difference. And so we spent a lot of time to work on ourselves by saying, we want to be part of positive change. We want to be a community that when we get asked to participate at tables, that we both have the competence to be there, but also the the soft skills, the values, the attitudes that are conducive to good community mobilization of change. So you see drivers of change up top. It's very meaningful to us. I think we've heard this before, catalysts of change, agents of change, but we, it's very, passionate when we talk about it, but we really do feel like the minority community, 1 million of us in Quebec, that we can make change. And many of the people on the call today who's part of the community, I think we've experienced that. And so that's the heart of the model, is that we want to be part of positive change. We don't want to sit on the side or work in silos. We want to be actively working with government and community partners to create change in our communities. So it's kind of an inspiring model. The heart of it, Jennifer mentioned, just one last thing, the heart of it, I think everyone can read, but it's really around intersectoral partnerships and collaboration. So it's really about that, a minority community, recognizing we need to get organized as a minority community, but at the same time, we realize we have to be a highly collaborative group of people for this to be successful. So you'll see the variety of approaches we take. Obviously, we look at in our health, because we're a health organization, we talk the terminology that might not be everyone's day-to-day terminology, social determinants of health. But we began to look at those things that affect our health the most in our communities. And we tried to put them into broader categories so that we had some general idea of, what are the things that impact us as a community the most? And then in terms of development principles, if we were to apply consistently some important principles, what are those things that if we were to build our leadership skills around and apply consistently, we would get some success? And finally, a value system, I think, would probably be one of the most important things that we've really tried to do, is to understand, like, who are we as a community, to do some soul searching and saying, who are we? How do we want to portray ourselves to majority community? What are those things that we think that are, that will help shape stereotypes and attitudes as we move along this change process with government and majority partners? So preserving our identity, obviously, with minority communities is an important one. We have a rich culture and history, just like any minority. We want to promote that as along the way. We want to be champions of social inclusions, and we've all faced some forms of social exclusion at times, and just be champions of that. And just the concept of equity, that we want to be at the tables and we want to have an equitable opportunity to flourish and grow here in Quebec, just like any other minority and majority population. So that's a little bit about the model. There it is.
Yeah, you know what I really like about it, Russ? Well, we've seen it over 2 slides. The first slide showed it as one page, a one-page model,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's something that everybody who's part of the network, and I think lots of people that are on the call today kind of go, oh, well, this is our shared and collective work, right? And so it's a really nice way of framing all the things that you do, both at CHSSN as a organization, but also across the whole network as well. Hey, Jennifer, we're going to go back to you. One of the things that I was most interested in some of the materials that you sent was how communities in your network were responding to COVID. And so I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that and maybe some lessons that you've learned. We're not completely out of COVID, but certainly in Quebec, you're doing quite well. And so what have you learned through this last year?
Sorry. I definitely can say that COVID was the test. It was a test of leadership. It was a test of connections with our partners. It was a test for the trust that the community has in these organizations. And I have to say that of all of our community partners, I think they passed those tests remarkably well. I mean, everybody was putting on the life vests and making sure the lifeboats were getting in the water, back a year ago. We were kind of in that panic mode, but it didn't last long. I would have to say that the experience that these networks have really helped them to reorganize. I mean, they literally had to reorganize how they functioned, going onto virtual platforms, reaching out to the new vulnerable populations, these seniors that were once very mobile and able to, be volunteers and, be a contributing member of society, all of a sudden became housebound and were unable to connect to the world the way they were used to. They became a new vulnerable population that our networks did an amazing job of identifying and connecting to and helping through this process. And I think that the most remarkable illustration of how the maturity of these networks was shown was that the public health partners turned to them in many cases and asked them for support to make sure that the English speaking communities was getting the information that they needed to get around COVID. The government did an unprecedented job of making sure that material was available in English. And they leaned on us, they leaned on our networks to make sure that those documents were distributed to the community. They did their own efforts as well to distribute some of the main documents, but a lot of the sort of not secondary, but second rung translations were distributed through our networks. And I think that the lessons learned for me in watching all of our networks cope and in my own network and coping was that if you have built up partnerships that are solid, if you have the trust of your community, if you have the links established with the key partners in the community, those are the things that you have to lean on in a period of crisis. Those are we don't value those things enough sometimes. I think that COVID has really illustrated the importance of there being a relationship between community organizations and the population and the community organizations and the service providers. And it's not just the English speaking community. I think it's many minority or sub communities of the population, French and English and other, that I think all learned this lesson. And lastly, I think that, Quebec is enormous. I was looking at a presentation today and they were illustrating where all of our new wellness centers are. And I was looking at the map and it was on the US, Canada and US together. And I was like, oh my gosh, the distance between the most northerly community that we have and the most southerly and the most west is like the distance between Montreal and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I mean, it's a huge territory. And so we just have to make sure that we are able to maintain those relationships because in the future, I think video conference is going to be the future of most of what we do. When you look at those distances, you say, video conference makes sense. And so this pandemic really has, I think, forced the issue and will benefit in the long term because we'll get together more often. We'll actually have more opportunities. And I think Russ would even say that, he's done more workshops and reached more people in the last year than we have in the past because of it. And so I think it's going to be part of our long-term future.
Yeah, I think it is really changing the way that we all are going to be connecting with one another. I'm sure we'll go to hybrid to some degree, but the virtual is, I think, a part of the future. One thing that's really unique to CHSSN, and one thing I was really intrigued with was this leadership development model that you have developed. And you developed it in partnership with others, as you did with your community mobilization model. So, Russ, I wonder if you can maybe walk us through the leadership development model and how it has been really helpful in terms of growing leadership across the CHSSN network.
Sure. Well, it stems back from 2012 and the development of our mobilization model where, some people on the call, English community organizations in our network, they identified how important it was to develop their own leadership. And they self-expressed that, the greatest asset we have as a minority community is us, the people that make up that community, and the demonstration of our leadership. So we hold it pretty near and dear to our heart that building both our competency skills in community development and community mobilization, as well as our character. So, all the soft skills that are required, the values, the attitudes, the soft skills that are required, to build relationships with people are equally as important. So this was kind of, a very specific approach to look at both, I guess, those character development skills and the competency that's required to do good community and community change work. So again, the other thing is connecting ourselves to research and evidence and community practice. So something that's created where we build things, community, we take such pride in building things on our own, and we want it to be our own because it's so much more meaningful and it hits the mark based on our needs and priorities. But at the same time, we want to make sure we're linked to solid research and practice. I think Jennifer mentioned that earlier on. And so this was a collaboration with Concordia and two professors there that worked with us over about a 6-month period. And we began to identify, 4 pillars in particular that were kind of framing where we refer to them as leadership competencies. And so you can see them on this screen there. I don't need to get into them, but there are 20. And at the time, these were kind of defined as, what were the things that were most important for us to develop as leaders in order to have the best success we can as a community. And I would just move on to the bottom. You're going to see leadership, credo, and values and beliefs. So I talked about that earlier a little bit, but there you guys can see, I don't know if you've had experience about developing a leadership credo, but it becomes very meaningful for people when we can talk about our beliefs and our values related to whatever topics they are. It connects us and binds us as individuals, and it makes things so much more meaningful. I'll just share with you the very first one because it's really, really important. If you're not used to working with the minority community, or you're not part of a minority community, it's not very, it's not by nature we think of these things. When I was in Calgary, I did not think of this when I was working with minority communities. I was part of the majority community. I expected when I reached out to a minority community leader, they would just show up and away we go. I never thought to think, I never thought to think, that's funny, but anyways, you follow what I mean. I never really took the time to reflect that if they've had a lot of no's, they may be facing stereotypes. It takes a lot of courage and resiliency and all these things that I take for granted by me showing up at that table. I'm educated, I work for the government, I'm this, I'm that. And you have people coming from minority communities that may not be working they're working for communities. So there's a power difference there. They probably have faced all kinds of setbacks in their lives for a variety of different things. So when we built this, I mean, you can see, having the commitment, just the word commitment and courage is pretty compelling. Many people on the call today, they know what we're talking about. I mean, we've all had to dig deep sometimes when you are that, minority person and you go to a meeting and it's in a different language and you have to deal with different stereotypes and perceptions and a history of exclusion. You would need to have courage to go out there and hold up your hand and talk to people and say, this is our needs as a community, to have the confidence to communicate to people and take action on this stuff. So that's just an example of, and you see different words in there that are really compelling, like staying resilient and focused. There's a big emphasis on relationships and how we can inspire and promote others. Also, a minority community, there's a lot fewer numbers. So the importance of us inspiring and involving other people in leadership and getting them involved in our community leadership efforts is so, so important. So anyways, it's a leadership credo. It's all out there. We didn't invent it. We just took what was out there and applied it to our own setting. So I think that was also another really compelling, almost vision statement for leadership development.
Before we move on, Jennifer, anything you want to add about this? Because I think that this is a pretty foundational to the work of CHSSN and really what we can all be thinking about in terms of our own organizations or our own networks.
Yeah, I want to link it back to the statement I made earlier about the importance of community leadership and community governance, because leadership is something that you have to learn sometimes. And so putting out there, you know, if you go back up to the preceding slide, if you show people that there are, you know, critical steps, critical competencies that, you know, you need to be able to have in order to, you know, be a leader in your English speaking community. You got to have a vision. You want to have that sense of community is in control. Community is making the decisions about where they want to go and what they want to address. You have to be able to build that relationship with your partners. You have to actually, as a person, maybe build your capacity of public speaking, sharing a vision, you know, effective communication. It's not something that comes naturally to everybody. It's some things that have to be learned. And so, you know, just by identifying these, sometimes a person can say, okay, I need to build my public speaking skills, or I need to make sure I understand better what this vision is that we have for this issue. You know, I think that these types of frameworks can be so helpful for developing that sort of like that methodical approach to an issue. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a plan and to, you know, build a strategy and to bring all the people around the table. I mean, that's really, you know, you've got to have that leader. You've got to have that champion that's going to be out there to be able to express, to put into words what it is that the challenges that you're facing. That makes such a difference in terms of, you know, any minority community, and not just our own.
I think it is a really helpful framework, and it's somewhat internally facing, but it's also externally facing, right? So it has a little bit of this and that on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really kind of cool. And I like how you framed the competencies as almost guideposts for folks that are leading change in their community. So really nice. Hey, I've got one more question for both of you. But also I want to signal to everybody on the call, put questions into the Q&A box or into the chat box, whichever you feel comfortable with, for Russ and for Jennifer. If there's something you want to dive a little bit deeper on, or if there's something you want to ask a question about, we're going to come up to the questions after this one. But the final question is really about advice. So what advice do you have for both the inclusion and the positioning work of populations, minority populations, and advancing their concerns? Because you've seen that roll out at the local community level and what local communities have been able to achieve. But as a network, as CHSSN, as the team behind CHSSN, you've also had to play that role at a provincial level. So what advice might you have to others that are involved in this similar kind of work?
Well, you know, there's many. I'll cherry pick a couple of them. I would say that and we've mentioned most of them already. Absolutely, you have to have a knowledge base that the person you're trying to reach will understand. It has to be a graphic or a table, or, you know, it has to have something that's relatable for them to understand the position that the minority community is trying to put forward. That knowledge base has to be, you know, the key ingredient for breaking down the barrier between the minority and the majority population. The second thing is you have to prepare. I remember we had these wonderful sessions where we would pretend, okay, Russ is going to be the somewhat negative, public partner, and I have to go in and I have to convince him that, that the English speaking community's needs are not being met. And you do a role play and you have an opportunity to, actually practice those types of interactions. And, it's not something that comes naturally for somebody that didn't prepare for it academically or didn't prepare for it, through their work. So I think that there's an element of preparation that is super critical for those especially early meetings with partners. And last, I think that having having the key community members speak on behalf of the community it can't be repeated. When I have Kimberly Buffett or Shelley from the Lower North Shore sitting in the room with me, telling their story about how crazily difficult it is to get English speaking services on the Lower North Shore, it's undeniable. So you really, if you have these spokespersons, they don't even have to be somebody that's on your staff. I mean, it can be a community person or whatever, but that real life story is sometimes worth 1,000 words with regards to helping put forward the realities of the minority population you're dealing with.
And 1,000 PowerPoint presentations.
Yeah.
What about you, Russ? What's advice that you might have?
I think just to build off that a little bit, I think, well, the first thing, if you're not working with minority communities and you're involved in leading a change process or community mobilization process, it's to really try to reach out to those minority populations and to involve and engage them to ensure that their voice is heard. I think that's like a real key message for people that are working on majority initiatives. Obviously, for a lot of us that are part of the minority community, I think it's really to get organized as a minority community in every aspect, as what we were talking about today. A minority community, sometimes you got that one shot to make that impression, where you've got that big meeting with a government leader or with some prominent, community organizations. And if we come across as we are caring people, we want to help in the broader solutions of the society, and we're highly collaborative people. We represent needs of the community, not just our own experiences, and that we're working together in a kind of a collective way. It's only engaging for majority people to want to work with us. So I think it comes both ends, from majority and minority communities, to reflect and think of the importance of what the minority community brings to change efforts. Yeah.
I think that's where CHSSN and Tamarack have a lot of intersection, right? So, one of the things that we've really advanced and advocated for is the inclusion of people with lived and living experience who often aren't at the table, right? And so that kind of intersection of that voice, that firsthand knowledge and experience, the context expert, as we call them, can be a really powerful way of creating change and creating stories. Hey, so thanks so much, both of you, for both sharing the frameworks that you use, but also giving us a little bit of insight into, the work that you've done, the really good work that you and the network have done over the last 20 years in advancing, the health and vitality of the English-speaking community across Quebec. I can see that we have a question in the Q&A box, and this is from Eddie Michelle. And Eddie says, what's the difference between leader and leadership? And if so, are there different types or styles of leadership?
Absolutely different types and styles of leadership, and 100%. And they're all, you know, if you look at the literature, there are leadership styles for different times. You have a leadership style that is more inclusive when you're being innovative. You have a leadership style that's more directive when you're trying to, you know, get to point B. You have a leadership style that, you know, can be even more collaborative when you're trying to, you know, build leadership skills within a group. Um, there's a really interesting body of literature on that, and I you know, I can't get into it today because I didn't refresh my own knowledge of it. I did it not too long ago, and I know it's there, but I don't have the terminology all in my head at the moment. But most definitely there are different types of and when you use those different types and styles, because all leadership isn't for every situation. And the differences between leader and leadership, you know, I'm not sure I can answer that. I'm struggling a bit with that one. But what I would say is that there's the champion isn't always your leader. The champion can often be, you know, the person that raises the red flag and builds momentum, and then somebody who's more structured and more knowledgeable about, you know, how to get a program done can get on board and lead lead the charge in terms of, you know, making change. So I think that's where I would leave that that question.
Great. Thanks so much. And we've got a couple more questions popping up in our Q&A panel here, so I'm going to bring them forward. Maybe this one is for you, Russ. Rebecca asked, what's the difference to ensuring all voices being heard and everyone's voice being reflected in a decision? So that's interesting, right? Because there's the one part about all voices being heard, and then when you come to the decision point, to have that reflection of voices. So I
Yeah.
wonder if you have any kind of comments about that.
Well, I just think too, in terms of the literature, when we look at, you know, community development initiatives, at some point, you know, our job as community developers often is to try and get the most broadest group we can and be extremely inclusive and engaging people so that, you know, all the input is heard. But then the question comes at some point, when do we move into action? So I think, you know, if we follow the principles of community development, at some point we need to move into action, but to constantly leave open space for reflection to occur as we move on to a different stage of development. So the action planning phase or something, so that, you know, and being ready to move and adjust. So whatever plan we had in place, that, you know, we're open to constant feedback loops and constant, you know, input from people. So if somebody's voice is heard, but their decision wasn't made to go with their opinion, they still feel included, respected, and wanted and required for the rest of the process to continue. You know, so I think that's the main thing, is creating a space for trust, you know, respect to carry along the process, and constant open feedback loops, so that they know that, well, that's okay, because I'm part of a collective and I can't always get my perfect voice, but, you know, down the road, I'm still important to this and I'm still going to have my voice, and maybe my idea will be picked up in phase 2 or phase 3.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really great answer. Thank you, Russ. So an anonymous attendee is asking the question, have you ever collaborated or thought of collaborating with Francophone communities in a minority situation in Canada? And so I know you probably do this already in Quebec. So Jennifer, I can see you nodding. So maybe give a couple of examples about that.
We've had some amazing sharing opportunities with Francophone minority communities from across Canada. We actually have had joint meetings. We sat down. We actually, I think 9 of our networks went to Eastern Atlantic Canada and sat down with representatives from the Francophone communities in the Atlantic provinces, and they shared experiences. We've had a joint meeting in Quebec City. At the provincial level, or I guess national level, for the Francophones, we have a sister organization, the Société Santé en Français, and we speak fairly regularly, and we sit on committees at the at Health Canada at the federal level as well. So there's quite a bit of discussion. Now, what's probably not yet been too successful is joint projects. You know, we haven't had many opportunities to work on a project together, but we certainly are having conversations and learning from one another for sure.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So Russ, the final question today is kind of directed to you. As you implement the leadership credo and the leadership model, you suggested that values and beliefs were of crucial importance. It's kind of like walking the talk. Did everyone adopt these, adopt a new way of living out the culture and the values, or were staff changes needed? Or what are some of the difficulties that you might have encountered as you rolled out the model?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, just like any of us that, you know, when we engage a group of people and we spend a day, an afternoon, or a couple days, it's the people in the room, the people that are present that define things as we go. So we've realized as new people come into the network, one of the really important things is to every now and then is to come back and revisit what we've created so that they can have their input and feel included, so that, you know, things are constantly revisiting. So, you know, as new people come in, they don't feel, oh, I have to adopt exactly what everyone else thinks. And that's not it. So, so that's the first thing. I think it's constantly bringing things back to revisit, to recognize new people and the change of personnel and people. But I would say, uh, when you start talking about the values that in our experience, people coalesce around some very, very important values, you know, and so there's some other values maybe that don't get spoken that might be more, people might say, well, I value this a little bit more than other people. We focus on those things that were compelling, that were very compelling to the majority of the people. So I think a lot of people went back into their workspaces and into their networks, you know, doing our best to, you know, be who we are, to express our own personal values, but to know that, you know, there's a certain attitude or behavior that's conducive to this type of work as well. You know, so I think that was a learning when we go into this stuff. So I don't know if I answered directly the question, but.
You know, the only other thing that I would add, just knowing what I know about the network, is that you also keep folks in touch with one another. So it isn't top down, it's really peer to peer. You know, and you both see yourselves as peers in the network as well. And I think, you know, that notion of peer to peer and co-design and co-creation, it sounds like it was pretty foundational in the process from what I've, you know, both read about you, wrote about you, and now listened to you at during the course of today. Hey, I want to once again thank both of you for your wisdom and sharing your wisdom and your approach and the approach of the CHSSN network. I know that rolls off your tongue easier than it does on mine. I want to also thank everybody who have joined us on the call today. Before we wrap up, just want to give you a couple of really quick announcements about what's going on at Tamarack and how you might be able to get involved with some of our work. We have a asynchronous learning course called Foundations of Community Engagement. So it's an online course, and if you're interested in building your community engagement skill set, you can go and register for this course and sign up and learn at your own pace. And at the end of the course, what you get is the ability to develop a community engagement plan for your organization or your community. And so I'm sure you're going to, those of you that are interested in community engagement, really enjoy taking the course. We've had about 400 people take the course so far and have had pretty good feedback. The other event that we have coming up is a collaborative governance and leadership workshop. So if you're struggling with some of the challenges of collaborative governance or leadership. We will be delivering this workshop twice. It's the same workshop, so you don't have to go to both sessions. You can choose one session or the other, and it's on June the 3rd, which is just coming up, and also on July 14th. And so welcome all of you to consider joining us then as well. As I mentioned, in a few days, you're going to receive a follow-up email, which will include a link to the audio recording and also a link to the slide deck. And we'll also put in a few other links to some of the resources that you can find on the CHSSN website, like the leadership model that you have, like the community mobilization model, and some of the background resources to those as well. To learn more about upcoming learning opportunities, including workshops and webinars like this one, visit us at tamarackcommunity.ca. And so, thanks again, Jennifer and Russ, for all that you shared today. I think it was, for me, a really interesting workshop. And I know that there was lots going on in the chat box of the folks that were engaged with us. Any final thoughts that you want to share with the folks on the call today?
I think I would just close off my thoughts for the day to be community development and leadership can sometimes feel very lonely, and I don't think you have to suffer in that sense of loneliness. There is so much material available and communities like ours to reach out to. And I totally encourage everyone to make sure that they connect with those types of resources to break down that sense of isolation.
I totally agree. And Russ, what about you? Any final thoughts to leave with?
Yeah, it's just recognition of the community networks that have been part of Engage with us over the 20 years. I mean, we're all working it together. Without their engagement and buy-in and involvement, it takes the whole sum to keep the wheel rolling. So it's really recognition that the stuff you've seen today, Jennifer and I are the speakers and the porte-paroles or whatever, but really there's a whole big network that has helped informed and has developed this stuff along with us. So yeah, recognition.
Yeah, there's that really good saying, right? It takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to raise a community. So that's really reflective of all of our collective work. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks again, Russ and Jennifer. And we'll see you all again soon.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.